Call to order the Planning Commission regular meeting, June 18th, 2026 at 6:30. I will ask the clerk to call roll.
Baldwin,
Here.
Patrick,
Here.
Gardner,
Here.
Lachey,
Present.
Marino,
Here.
Raphael,
Here.
and Mance.
Here. Before we move on to the approval of the agenda, let us welcome Chris. Chris, I know that he works on the ZBA, and I think he planned to remain on the ZBA. And we are allowed to have one member who can be part of both. So we actually commend you and say thank you for being willing to be on both. And welcome, and we look forward to your participation.
Thank you.
Next item then is approval of the agenda. Everyone had it in their packet. If there's any changes, if none, then we have a motion to approve.
So moved. Support.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Agenda is approved. Item 3, approval of the minutes. We had the minutes from our May 21st, 2026 in our packet starting on page 3. We get a chance to read through them. Any changes that anyone saw?
Not for me.
Not. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of May 21st, 2026?
Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from May 21st, 2026.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Seeing none. Approval of the minutes. Now moves us to the first public comment section. This is public comments on agenda items only. If you would like to speak, you would go up to the podium in the room or raise your hand and signal that you'd like to speak online and we'll call on you. Just give us your name, your address, and let us know what agenda item you'll be speaking about. In the room, we have none. Online, we have no hands up. So that will close out the public comments on the agenda. Taking us on to new business. First item on our new business is the site plan review for 150 Dunegrass. Rich, I will open it up and ask Grayson to kind of walk us through, and that starts on your packet on page 8.
Yeah, so this development's part of a 2013 special land use resolution, and the applicant's proposing a 2-story single-family dwelling with a walkout basement, pool, and an attached garage with second-story living space. The proposal complies with all PUD dimensional requirement modifications. The applicant has provided the vegetation plan, and the fire department has approved the height. We believe that the site plan standards of approval have been met, and the suggested motion includes just a few items that are typically reviewed and approved administratively as the project kind of progresses.
Yeah, a question since we're
Yeah.
of Grayson. In the proposed motion, you indicate provide landscaping plan sheet for administrative review. I saw that further up. Does that include the revegetation? Because there were some comments that you made about, there were concerns about revegetation, so that would be included in the landscaping plan sheet?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Grayson, this might have been a carryover from the 195 Dunegrass last fall, but on page 9, you put down the applicant has proposed a flat roof. 195 is a flat roof building, but the drawing that are in here is 150 is a peaked roof.
Yes, correct. Yeah, that is just carryover then.
Okay. Any other comments on this?
Looks straightforward to me.
I think we've had 4 or 5 of these now come before, the commission. It was obviously a requirement that came about from the settlement of the Dunegrass development that required about 2/3 of the lots that are being built in there that would have to have site plan approvals. But based on everything that I've kind of seen in here, it meets all the standards, just like Grayson had kind of pointed out. So I didn't have any further comments myself.
Yeah, for these, I generally rely on the staff to check all the boxes, and unless something jumps out at me, I think these are straightforward.
And again, if the builder was here, we'd ask him some questions later on about how he's going to build that driveway and what he's planning on doing, but it has nothing to do with the site plan. So if we have nothing, then do we want to?
Yeah, I do, the negative, the pregnant negative of silence. I will move to approve the site plan for the proposed dwelling and site improvements at 150 Dunegrass Ridge Drive based on a review against the conservation, recreation, and camp district CRC requirements, general zoning requirements, resolution number 131203 capital A, resolution number 150610-A, and section 154.063, standards for formal site plan approval, as documented in the June 12, 2026 staff report. Approval is contingent upon the following: 1, satisfy all city engineering review comments; 2, secure public water service approval; 3, provide compliant residential exterior light fixture specifications; and 4, provide the landscaping plan sheet for administrative review.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Excuse me. This will be a roll call vote.
Baldwin.
Yes.
Patrick,
Yes.
Gardner,
Yes.
Leshay,
Yes.
Marino,
Yes.
Raphael.
Yes.
And May.
Yes. Let them know, even though they didn't come, it's approved. Next item is the public hearing for the text amendment proposed by 510 Butler, 120 Mary Street, property otherwise known as Wickwood Inn. This time I will open the public hearing. And I'll ask the zoning administrator to give us a summary of what we have proposed in front of us in our kit that all of us had a chance to review.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Maybe for our attorney, why, this is the first time this is being introduced in front of us? Why is it all of a sudden a public hearing rather than just introduction for discussion purposes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was going to comment on that. This is really just a public hearing in name only. It was noticed as a public hearing, but that was before we had received the memo from Wickwood. And so the scope of the public hearing notice is limited to the R1 district, and then the memo we received from them has changes to several districts. And so we kept it as a public hearing because it was noticed, but it doesn't have the same legal effect that you would need for the public hearing under the Zoning Enabling Act. So it's really just a public hearing in name only, to take input from the public or to, get input from the Planning Commission. But my recommendation, and after speaking with Grayson, I think he would agree, is that there's no decision made tonight. It would be essentially tabled, and then we would hold a public hearing under the Zoning Enabling Act to make sure that that's legally compliant. Similar to what happened before, we didn't actually receive the memo until we were already into the 15-day notice period. And so there was no way we could have had a legally sufficient public hearing today anyway. But because the notice had already ran, we just thought it would be less confusing to keep it as such and let the public participate. And then we'll hold a second, legally compliant public hearing for the Planning Commission to take action at a subsequent meeting. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm happy to answer any other questions about it, though.
I do have if I may, a separate question. It strikes me that we're now seeing a succession of where individual property owners are directing zoning changes directly to the Planning Commission rather than to the City Council, with the City Council then referring that to the Planning Commission. It struck me today that it would seem like the more correct way to go would be for them to petition our elected body, and then the City Council then refer it to us for consideration. It just seems like it may be a more direct way, but I'm not sure. In my mind, it's the most correct way. Do you have an opinion, legal or otherwise, on that?
So I believe, legally speaking, the ordinance does allow individuals to submit applications for a zoning amendment. I have to double check that. So legally speaking, I think it may be sufficient, but I share your concerns. And Grayson and I and David have been talking about proposing potential sort of policies to put in place to help sort of alleviate the strain for this type of thing at certain timelines and such. And so those may be coming forward. Grayson, are you aware off the top of your head if the zoning ordinance allows for a citizen to submit an amendment? I can double check right now.
I was going to say,
It does.
awesome. I was going to say off the top of my head, you have it. Okay, I believe so.
Yeah.
When it requires the application, it requires the
Yeah.
deposit and the fact that they are responsible for all the fees. And
Yeah. So legally speaking, I guess to put a bow on it, I think that they probably are able to do that. But we would like to put some procedures in place to make it a little cleaner and more efficient on everybody involved. So.
Okay, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thank you. Say, go ahead with your summary then by the zoning administrator, please.
Yeah, so the applicant is requesting a text amendment to establish a new lodging use, which would be a boutique inn. And the proposal is to permit multiple accommodation buildings and is intended to allow accessory services, amenities, expanded dining options, and event spaces that could serve both overnight guests and the general public. This proposal would have broad implications as it's proposed as an allowable use in 9 zoning districts. In all commercial districts, the use is permitted by right. In the R3 and neighborhood marine districts, they would require a special land use. And in R4, it could be a permitted use or a required special land use based on where the lot's located. Under this proposed approach, the conversion of the Wickwood Inn to a boutique inn would be permitted by right, removing any of the discretionary review by the planning commission to consider site-specific impacts and operational characteristics. I'd say the primary concern we have would remain with the appropriateness of the proposed boutique inn use within the R4 district, which was established as a residential district with very limited allowable non-residential uses. And the inclusion of restaurants open to the general public and accessory event facilities no longer being limited to overnight guests also may exceed what has traditionally been within the R4 district. And then we touched on the public hearing. Otherwise, I included a sheet that has some relevant definitions based on their proposal as well as what's just currently in the zoning ordinance. And then the applicant is here too to probably do the more thorough overview.
Thank you, Grayson, which moves us on to the presentation by the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Wickwood tonight is here to discuss and provide an overview of the proposed text amendments. If not, there's copies coming around of it. Wickwood is proposing a new classification, as Grayson indicated, as a boutique inn. It would be a new lodging classification under your zoning ordinance. It'd be more expansive than bed and breakfast, but less than a hotel and inn. It would have really no implications or focus on auto-centric, such as motel or motorsport. Further, yes, it would have additional districts it would apply to. The proposed definition itself, thank you, Sarah, slide 2, the next slide now.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Thank you. We pulled the proposed definition out of your existing definitions to make sure that they align to the extent possible. So the first bit being a lodging use, which has sleeping rooms available for rent by transient people on a short-term basis. That is pulled from your bed and breakfast establishments. The next portion of our definition, well, if you don't know, thank you, is occupied by the property owner or an on-site residential manager. Again, pulled from your bed and breakfast ordinance already, occupied by the owner or residential manager. Moving along to our third line of proposed definitions, a boutique inn may contain amenities, including but not limited to swimming pool, game room, exercise facilities, or similar amenities, which are for the exclusive use of guests. A lot of that, again, is pulled right from the hotel definition as highlighted in your packet and on the screen. And then lastly, a boutique inn may also contain restaurant or event facilities, which shall be operated primarily through, though not necessarily exclusively, for the benefit of overnight guests. With that as well, our ending portion of the definition would include a boutique inn shall not be considered or constructed to be a hotel, inn, motel, bed and breakfast establishment, multifamily dwelling, or similar facility. And again, that is pulled from your existing hotel/inn definition. From there, as already been alluded to by Mr. Grayson, we have proposed where this would be permitted, where it'd be considered a special land use, and where it would not be permitted as a draft text currently. I'm going to leave you all from having to read through those. The R4 district proposed status would be permitted by right. Boutique inns located within existing buildings or lots abutting a C1 or C2 zoning district. And then special use requirement for new construction for a boutique inn or on lots not abutting a C2 district. Parking requirements would be 1 space per 3 guest units, consistent with your bed and breakfast establishments already. exempt from parking minimums in all C1 and C2 district, which is again consistent with other uses, including hotel and inn. Proposed use standards would be consistent with bed and breakfast establishments, no more than 2 adult per room, must meet building and fire codes, no individual cooking facility and guest rooms. Signage, we would propose more permissible than the R4 standards, less permissive than the C2 standards. Guest stay limits to 14 consecutive days or 30 days per year. Noise and nuisance would have restrictions as well, and then accessory guest units permitted by special use permit. Further from there, new boutique in standards, conversion of existing home permitted without special use permit. Maximum guest rooms would be 1 per 1,500 square feet of lot area. Bed and breakfast establishments would have no limit. Hotel would be 1 per 1,900 square feet. Further along, food and beverage services may be open to the general public in designated dining rooms only. Dining room seating capacity shall not exceed 2 times the number of guest rooms. No requirement for breakfast to be included in the room rate. No service in dining room after 10, and no service in public dining room before 8. Events, persons named on event reservation must be overnight guests. Non-overnight guests may attend events. Maximum guests would be 6 times the number of guest rooms, so it'd be a ratio for that depending on the location. No event can be started before 9, and no event, it must end after 10 p.m. Further, so then the comparison of this requirement manager's quarters, as it relates to Brookwood status, we have listed in here where it would be compliant already and how that would impact the proposed language. And the noise and nuisance, our understanding is there has been no complaints. Accessory guest units up to 5 approved, 3 constructed. That's how that would list. And then further conversion of existing homes approved and completed 2 times, no further conversions envisioned. And then total number of guest rooms under the requirement would be max 1 per 1,500 square feet. Existing is 1 per just under 1,800 and approved 1 per just under 1,600. In food and beverage services, dining, breakfast, not included, hours of operation. And again, it shows how Wickwood is already complying with this and then what those regulations would be across the new definition. Same thing with non-guest events and event capacity and time restrictions as well. So that in the short of it is what is being proposed as a boutique in use. Also included in your packets analysis that our team conducted, giving you a little bit more of a background on status within zoning districts where it would be permitted, the R4 district, as well parking requirements. And then we get into the use standards as well. And then as well, we have a comparison to Wickwood Inn, listing out the operational considerations and then how that impacts or reflects a hotel, bed and breakfast, the boutique inn proposed category, and then Wickwood's current status. And that, yeah. So, Mr. Chair, I believe that is my overview. I'm happy to address concerns, questions, comments.
I appreciate that.
I have a quick question. How many off-street parking spaces do you have? I drove by and counted 8, but I saw 10 in a document that Grayson prepared, so.
Defer to our, the owner on that
Oh.
one. I don't want to misspeak on that. Elizabeth, do you know
How many off-street parking spaces do you have? So. 2 over. Oh, okay. Okay.
I might have overlooked it, but in the chart you had under the event space that the ratio of event attendees, number of rooms cannot exceed 6:1. Where's that codified in the amendment or the ordinance? Is that codified anywhere? Or is that gonna, I don't know how that will operate and be enforced?
This is a proposed amendment to your ordinance in that regard. So we would have to be, if you guys as a commission continue to want to report on that, if something you would like to see or not. So it's a general starting point as we prepare this for you guys to
Okay.
consider. So.
Okay, so to follow up, how did you pick 6 instead of 10 or 4?
I'd have to defer to our report on that, Mr. Lachey, and I don't have that answer offhand for you.
Chris.
You mean refer to what? Your report?
That's in your packet.
This?
The report that's in your packet.
Okay, I'm looking at the report and it just, I'm not sure which part you're referring to, but it says cannot exceed 6 to 1 under proposed, and I just wondered how you got that number 6. And you said, I don't know. I think you just said,
Well, I said I'm unclear. Well,
okay, you're the expert and you're the petitioner's expert. I just wonder, I mean, does the petitioner anticipate a certain capacity for events? And that would translate to the 6 to 1? Or did you pull it out of somewhere that is covered by pants or?
the site itself is limited because of its capacity, right, and up to fire rating. So within that, I believe we did take that maximum occupancy number and reverse engineered it for you.
There you go.
Chris, how many rooms are actually in the inn itself? Isn't it 14?
14.
It's 14 in the inn. And then you have 5 rooms and the 2 accessories, right?
Rooms in the inn, the bungalow has 3 and then we're approved for 2 more, but we have not built those.
Or have not built them. So currently, when we're just, as we've been discussing this, we have 14 current rooms, but you could have 16. So, you know, I'm just throwing out 16 times 6 is 96 people. You know, across the street, you know, they were limited. Again, it's not a full bed and breakfast, but took dramatically less than that. So, you know, just as we're talking about things out loud here, 6 times to me, even if the fire chief says it's allowed. You know, we had more restrictions just because, and they're in a commercial district across the street, and now you're in a transitional district. You know, I would have issues, you know, with that if we were moving forward with this type of discussion as far as the 6 times.
Clarification, right? So.
Can you go to the microphone?
And I'm sorry, I don't, could you give us
You have
who
to
you
introduce
are?
yourself.
I work at Susie Horner, Schindler, who owns the Wickwood Inn.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't remember seeing you here at one of our meetings before. That's why I asked. Thank you.
So you were saying that you're confused when it pertains to other.
Oh, I'm just
Other-
kind of throwing out that you need to kind of go back and look at some of the limitations we put on other venues that would be holding events outside that are literally across the street
Yeah,
that, you know, had restrictions. And it would be, you know, so just kind of keeping that in mind, 6 is going to probably be, you know, you're pushing 100 attendees.
currently there's only 14 rooms. We are approved for 16,
Right.
but those aren't built in.
But if it goes into an ordinance at 6 times the number of rooms and you all of a sudden you come up with 16, then that can be 96 people.
I know, in previous
Yeah.
meetings, we've said 75, and I think in the future we are
Yeah.
putting in restrictions at 75, but we wanted to be inclusive to all
We
properties
understand.
in the city.
Right. Which is what, you know, there probably will come some other discussions for us. Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Any other comments or questions for the applicant?
Would you only envision for events that take place here, would it, I guess, could there be a scenario where you're fully booked at the Wickwood? And then there is an event, someone just want to rent out the space and no one who is staying at the Wickwood is part of that event? Okay, that's not something, okay.
I think they do provide that the sign-or for the event has to be a staying guest at the inn.
Any other questions for the applicant? If not, then we'll thank the applicant and we'll move on to public comments regarding this application. In the room, you're welcome to come up to the microphone or online, raise your hand if you have public comments. We have no additional ones in the room. We have no hands up in the Zoom. So we will close out the public comments with none, which takes us down to commissioners' deliberation. And again, we're kind of deliberating just our ideas on the thoughts on this. Is it something that just to kind of help them that we would want to see them kind of proceed with and have a future public hearing? Because you would have to, as Trent already said, you'd have to have a future public hearing. Even if it remained exactly as it is, because we didn't have proper notice.
I guess I'd lead just putting thoughts out there that I'm generally supportive. I think this gets after what I've tried to discuss before with maybe we want to broaden our bed and breakfast definition. And I think, you know, this creates a new classification, so I'm amenable to going this direction.
Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I also thought there was some discussion of holding off on any such amendments such as this until after we did the master plan. I know you have raised this issue before and you were a proponent of moving it sooner than later, but I thought there was at least some, if not consensus, at least some discussion about before we make significant changes to the zoning ordinance, we do the master plan first.
And that is, it's been stipulated numerous times. And one of the things I did learn, we were going back and kind of looking at the ordinance that allows for a petitioner to come before us. They could actually make the petition and then we would be asked to bring it forward. If it's something that they're asking us to do and we determine that it kind of overlaps with the master plan, we can move this up and we can do it now. It would be being done at their expense because all the reviews, because one of the things that it is going to require, if we wanted to look at it the way it is currently, we'd have to start looking at all the other zones that this could potentially impact and kind of say, hey, does this make sense? Would we be okay having a bed and breakfast there? And so that would be something that would kind of overlap with what David would be doing during the master plan. But if they want us to do it now, as opposed to, that would probably occur in 2027 if we were going to go look at different type of uses, if that's something that came out of our master plan. But since they have actually brought it before us, then this moves it up. And Grayson, I think when we were talking, and Trick can probably also weigh in, that we actually could review this as a standalone, and then it would be incorporated as we are doing the master plan. Just a lot of it becomes a matter of timing and who's paying for it.
I know you brought up council earlier, and I don't know, Commissioner Gardner, if anyone else watched when this was discussed at the council meeting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but generally council seemed very supportive of trying to find a path ahead, and while also, but I don't know if you recall, I know it was a while ago, if you recall any of that deliberation, you could maybe share.
Yeah, if memory serves, the discussion that we had was around the alcohol service, and which the planning commission recommended approval, which council approved, I think, at its last meeting, but we didn't get into any great discussion about this type of change. I appreciate Commissioner Lachey bringing up the comment about, whether council this should be requested to council first and consider before saying, okay, we're going to remand this to the planning commission for their discussion and review. Because that's going to give you a sense of whether the council itself, the elected officials, are going to be on board with this change. I have some great concerns about this. And I've expressed these before. And I just Googled and I used AI to say, okay, tell me about boutique inns in Michigan. You know what comes up? Mackinac Hotel. And interestingly enough, Porches on Mason.
I'm sorry?
Porches on Mason. Which I was not on the planning commission. They market themselves as a luxury boutique inn, but I don't think they're officially, because that doesn't exist in our zoning. So,
No, that's interesting.
right. So it's a marketing term. It's not a zoning term.
And that's R4 too, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and they don't have any event space. They don't do events. It's a bed and breakfast.
Because that's what it's currently.
Yeah,
called as.
And in the presentation, Wickwood always does a fantastic job giving us all the information we need to have good discussion on this. The two things I'm concerned about is on slides 17 and 18, and they state it clearly. Food and beverage service to general public, not currently permitted, seeking pathway to approval. The other one is non-guest at events, not currently permitted, seeking pathway to approval. This district is a transitional district to residential. And I completely appreciate the Wickwoods owners trying to move this towards more of an event center because that's probably in their financial interest. But as a neighbor to this, literally a block away, parking, the additional, everything that goes along with an event centers are popping up like dandelions around this area right now. So it's a very competitive market. But from a zoning standpoint, I don't know that an event center, which is what they stated they're trying to move towards, is really in the best interest of the community at that location. That's my concern.
Okay.
And it's not even a block away, it's within the same block.
Yeah.
Or across the street.
I do share that concern about whether event spaces should be allowed on that stretch of Butler. You do it for one, you got to let others do it. There's a lot of things in here I don't like that I doubt are that important to the applicant, like special land use going away, being able to convert an existing structure without a special land use. I mean, all these things that I think they were trying to, do a complete zoning text amendment. But so I guess where I thought we might go with this is so if there's a limit of 28 people, for example, do I care if every single one of those people is an overnight guest? Probably not. Do I care if there's some amount of extra people over 28? Like for a short-term rental, we say you can have 50% of the overnight capacity, on site, and that's okay. So maybe something incremental like that is kind of where I was thinking, but not a 90-some person event space that would be, if it's weddings or whatever, it's going to be boisterous. It's going to be loud, even if you limited, no amplified music and no, all the things we did for the cottage. So, so that's, I guess, my initial take on this.
And it's interesting, your point that the applicability, I would guess it would be the necessary applicability of, if this were approved, look at all the other potential zoning districts, but that's not what they're asking us to do. This is a specific request for a specific parcel. They're couching it in terms of a zoning definition change, but they're not being in any way philanthropic about any other businesses in this town, and that's fine. That's they have their own self-interest. But I mean, it is interesting that, yes, if this were to move forward at all, we would definitely have to look at and see who else might be potentially impacted, what other businesses might be able to make themselves available. Porches of Saugatuck might say, gosh, okay, now we want to be an event space. I mean, it is, it goes far beyond just Wickwood saying, gosh, can you give us a special definition so that we can do it just with our parcel? Because that just isn't what's happening here.
Because the way it's drafted is if we added boutique use in as a permitted, and we could limit it to just R4 if we could do that as far as our discussion. What they have provided is knowing that if you're going to introduce a permitted use in R4, where at the same time, where else would you want to say it's permitted? And that's why they've had it drafted, or they sent it over to us, and Trent and the team drafted it so that it would incorporate all the commercial districts as well as the other residential districts, as to whether it be allowed, not allowed, permitted or not permitted. Which would be, again, I think if we were to introduce a boutique inn or some type of new definition, we would have to kind of look at it and say, okay, it doesn't apply typically just to one zone. So eventually we would have to look at every other zone. But what I was saying earlier is that right now we can talk about it just for like R4, which would primarily affect the Wickwood, or if we could take it and expand it. But if we want to expand it, then we really do have to take time to look at, okay, where else, if I'm looking along Lake Street, if I'm looking downtown, would I think that this would be suitable? And also if right now they have that definition in there that if you are located across from, a commercial, so I'd have to look at Water Street South and kind of say, okay, every one of those lots could say they're across the street. Water Street East, every one of those could say I'm adjacent to, this, so I do that. Are we setting something up? So I was just saying that once we move it outside of the R4 discussion, it really takes a lot more evaluation, kind of like what we were doing when we did the waterfront preservation, where David provided a lot by lot analysis, of where we thought each lot, potential redevelopment. So we could kind of assess, what was the overall risk, the need for it. I think you'd have to have something like that, and that's why I kept saying it probably goes more with the master plan, because that's kind of what we'd be doing. I know that there's always going to be some pushback when you kind of move from a commercial into a transitional area as to what's appropriate and not appropriate. But if we go back to the Tri-Community Master Plan from 2016, it talked about the R4 transitional district. And it said that it's designed to be a transition, but it's not designed to be static. It said it should change over time. And actually in the 2016, they had it changing from the commercial district ending at Mary Street and actually ending at Lucy Street is what they were talking about in their future land use. So it is for 10 years plus, we've had no changes within the R4 district. So the idea of allowing a property that is directly across from a commercial, I'm not so opposed against, but we still have to work through the number because I think there is a big issue, just like it was with the cottage being in the commercial district. And when we started talking about noise and the parking and holding events. So I would agree. I was trying to raise the point. I think we have to do some kind of a ratio as to the number of guests. If you got 14 rooms, you can have 28 guests. So, maybe the maximum would be double that number. So you're at 56. So that's a 4 times. But those are the type of things we can kind of get into as to what's the limit. And they can kind of determine if that's really what we're looking at. Is that beneficial enough for them to say, hey, I want to continue to foot the bill while you do the analysis of whether you want to move this forward? And that's some of the thoughts that I kind of have.
No, I just want to add one thing too, that static note that you made actually did make it over from the tri-community plan into your zoning ordinance. And under some of the intent purpose for the R4 district, it does state that the zone is not intended to be static, but rather to adjust with the development needs of the community.
Right. And again, there could be an argument that, we do have a lot of additional event spaces opening up. None of them happen to actually be in the city of Saugatuck, which would generate the revenues as well as the taxes for the city as opposed to city of Douglas or the township. And again, it wouldn't be the largest, I shouldn't say none of them, because we do have some again, we have the cottage. But it is an additional, so I can kind of see that it's beneficial to the development, but we have to kind of look at the parking, the noise, different things as you're factoring it in. And then also how often, would they, have, these events. I don't think you can really limit how often they can have an event though, once they have approval.
I'll push my comments out. I really glad that you put your definitions out, because this is something that Commissioner Marinos brought up a few times about updating our definitions of bed and breakfast, our motor court, and then we have motel motor court. We have some confusion within our definitions. It would have been great to get to make this overall and get that all done, but I'm supportive of doing something. I do like the discussion of making sure we put some boundaries on what that can become. Even 56, I think sounds like a lot. I thought your comment of the 1.5 of what the STRs, it seems to be a number, and that gets you to like 36 or 30, so
42.
yeah, okay, yeah, so maybe that's something, but I'm open to that discussion, and I look forward to maybe getting some of these other definitions resolved and updated to modern days.
Now, and also just my feeling, as one of 7 here, the idea that we would grant any of them by right, I would have a difficult time with, because I still think I'd like to see each one have to come before us and where we have to be able to evaluate. I understand why it was put in, because you've been before so many times. It's like, hey, if you're going to do it, let's make it so that you don't. But I have to look at it and say, hey, that means anybody else who's filing one that's similar. There's a house 2 down from the Wickwood. If they all of a sudden sold and wanted to try to expand in some way, could they use the same argument? And plus, it would be applicable to other zones. And so we'd really have to be careful that if there's, again, it's an analysis. How many properties could come to us and say, oh, I'm going to make this change over to a boutique inn and say it's by right. So I think no matter what, to me, it's always going to be a special land use.
I think that's where we kind of, play around with the numbers a bit, but I don't want to get, and I know I say this is our delegate to the parking task force, but I don't want to get too hung up on what it will bring in, because like in theory, the Star of Saugatuck could add an additional ride every day if they wanted to, and that brings in another 80 people, and we're not going to get up in arms about that. So I think you balance it as a factor of many, so.
I think the more basic question is, do we need, and you mentioned it, and appreciate your thoughts or your thoughts. You seem to be the 2 proponents. Do we need an additional definition? Do we need a definition of boutique inn in this town? Is that's a baseline policy question. Are needs for people staying here being currently met Or is there this gap of people who are out there saying, oh, I'd come to Saugatuck if you had a boutique inn, but you don't, so I'm going somewhere else. It really strikes me that we have a single business who has been driving this for months and months and months. I believe this is at least the 12th meeting that they have come to us with some type of proposal. And so explain to me, why do we need a boutique inn definition? If it weren't for Wickwood, why would we need a boutique inn definition?
I mean, I think it just goes with how times are changing and how we are, the town is serving a different demographic now and a different type of visitor is coming here. And the way that things have been, I think, as the town has shifted. For example, I have a 4-bedroom house next to me that sleeps 12 people. So that's allowed in a very residential zone. And yet we're kind of in a more commercial zone. Should that use kind of be able to get expanded a little bit because there's a demand for it? Obviously, there's a demand because I don't think they would be here if there wasn't a demand for it. Now, I don't know if other people are going to be incentivized to do that and to want to create a boutique inn. But I do think that we've obviously interpreted our bed and breakfast definition very conservative. And I think this is just, I'll give them a good faith attempt to expand that based on at least what I've said and others have said during some meetings.
I suspect their 6-to-1 ratio, for example, is what they feel is commercially feasible or advisable. A 96-person wedding is certainly more viable than a 48-person wedding. We have event spaces in town.
Mhm.
And so I go back to, do we need an event space in, basically where there are residences next door, across the street, behind the property, a block down? And you are absolutely right about on the hill. There are some houses that have a lot of capacity. And I'll tell you, when they are at their plus whatever amount, it's loud.
Mhm.
It's noisy, it's impactful on parking, it's impactful on noise, it's impactful on the livability of the community. And so I think there needs to continue to, I personally believe there needs to be continue to be a bright line stop between commercial and residential. And you can call it transition, you can say we need to move with the times within our commercial district, or change it to a commercial district. But, there are people who have invested in those homes, and to have one business come before us and say, okay, we aren't happy with what we bought and we want to continue to expand, and incrementally. Next month, they'll come with something else. And I think it's really, it just sits wrong with me. I'll be quite honest with you.
Yeah, to Commissioner Marino's point, when I look at it, again, I think about, is there a reason for it? I kind of envision there's a number of people in my family and people I know that come into town that want to host a 30-person birthday party, or they want to have a small anniversary or like a small wedding, boutique wedding, and they're having challenges trying to find events. And even if they go to some of the other larger venues, they may give them just like the little flower part, but the cost of it is kind of it ends up being higher. Or they're looking for a place to stay. So when you have a boutique inn offers, it has rooms that could possibly accommodate the majority of the people who might be part of that party or that wedding that weekend. And I think that is something that is unique that we don't really have. We have some event spaces, but do we have a place where somebody could stay? If I'm having a small 30 or 40-person wedding, do I have a room that they can be getting, the groomsmen can be getting ready and the brides can be getting ready and a yard that would be desirable? I see that it has those items. So that's why I would say I'm much more open to it, as long as it's got some limits, on the impact. As far as if this was located at the very northern end of the R4, You know, and it was surrounded by the homes. I know there's homes around it, but it's literally the first property in the R4. And we talk about the R4 is a transitional mixed use. It is not, it's residential, but it's transitional mixed use. Mixed use means you'll have some commercial, you'll have some residential. And so this is, you know, it's not that far fetched from my standpoint of thinking of it. You know, we talked before, and you said, okay, make it commercial. Well, you know, they could come before us and they could ask, okay, we're located right across the street and I got a bed and breakfast and a hotel that are within a block of me that are in the commercial district. So could I be rezoned to the commercial C1? And if it was rezoned to C1, then they could actually operate as a hotel. They wouldn't have to be in front of us on, you know, any of this. So there are other ways that it could potentially go also, whether or not we'd say, hey, we're going to allow a one lot to be a corner lot to all of a sudden become part of the commercial. But these are things, again, when we look at the previous master plan, we look at what a transitional neighborhood is and how it's not supposed to be static and change over time. I find that easier than to kind of accept the location of this. But I do think I have to look at every other property in those zones and think about, you know, what if they want to do similar? Or are there restrictions that you say, or this can be allowed if you are adjoining, as they've kind of proposed? But then I want to look at every other zone and say, okay, what lots are, you know, across the street or touching the commercial? And what would be would we think it'd be appropriate if 2 or 3 of those all of a sudden, you know, the house over here on Culver, it's in Water Street South, you know, if that all of a sudden got purchased and wanted to be an event space, would I have an issue? The people behind it may, because that's condominium. Those are things you got to kind of look at. But that's at least long answer.
And I think that's why that's important about it being a special land use. And I think it makes it especially important if we move forward that we are communicating those reasons. And because that is because I know we're all worried about creep in R4 and how this kind of creeps there. But let's look at on the other side of the block that I think it's like that Dune Art Gallery now. That's a very different scenario because this one is effectively a half a block that they own, and then on 3 sides of them are commercial areas. That's different from another part of R4, and that's why if we do proceed this way, we just need to, I think, highlight those distinctions.
Exactly.
Because that supports us when we are looking at special land uses in the future, that, okay, that's why this is different from yours. And I think that protects us a lot on Mason Street too, because that is very residential. You have the SCA across the street, but the porches on Mason, it's much different because behind them, you have homes that are there on Hoffman Street and you have residential homes on each side. And I think that's a key distinction, so.
And I think we could also look at it, you know, as far as the lot coverage. Again, you know, Wickwood has a much larger property and they have the capability of having that outdoor space. Many of the other ones, at least without doing a complete analysis, but I can't recall other ones that would have that similar type of opportunity. So there's things that you can incorporate, you know, which already are part of like the R4, but we can go back and evaluate those too, you know, that could kind of limit other properties from moving forward. You know, so again, we can kind of tell that I like the concept. It's just how do we kind of get there and what type of limitations?
Okay, I don't like the concept. And I'll say again, because I think, for example, if you asked anybody who lives in the R4 district in a residence and said, when you bought this house or however long you lived here, do you live in a transition? Do you know you live in a transition zone that is in the tri-community plan going to change over time towards more commercialization? And are you okay with that? I would guarantee you, A, people don't know that, and B, they would say, no, I'm not in favor of having more commercial properties around me that are going to generate noise and parking problems and impinge upon my livability. For example, if you were somebody wanting to buy the house right to the north of Wickwood, which is still for sale, I just can't imagine that on a summer's evening, they're going to be happy about having 96 people celebrating a wedding, even if it ends at 10 o'clock. You know, I've lived here 12 years. I live on the hill. There are parties periodically, not every night, periodically throughout the hill that negatively impact other people and their enjoyment of what they've paid for. And yes, this gets back to short-term rentals, but I can name many people who I know personally who say that properties adjacent to them, several parcels over, whatever, repeatedly negatively impact their enjoyment of this community. So I am speaking for people who live here. I am not speaking for a commercial operation. And I think one of the seven of us needs to speak for the people who live here. And if that means stopping in its tracks an expansion, a creep of commercial development into residential areas, then that's where that's right now where I'm standing. I'm not saying I'm intractable, but right now that's my position.
Appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. Other comments, thoughts?
The only comment I would have is I have to thank the owners of the Wickwood for bringing this to the table. I mean, it's brought up some good conversations. It's very thoughtful for me to have to think about, okay, there's a lot of impact to this. It's not just a simple text definition change. There's a lot to this. And as a planning commissioner, you know, and I'd all due respect for Commissioner Lachey, I'm here representing the residents too. I live in a residential neighborhood with short-term rentals. I have a short-term rental. I don't have quite the same experience you do, but nonetheless, I'm here representing residents because I am one and I live very close to this property. And, you know, I've been here for my entire life. So my memories of this property are way different than everybody else's. I remember it as being a very sedate old folks home. Gone well beyond that, you know, the Wickwood, when Julie Rosso bought it, came in, it was done in a way that was just, it didn't change the neighborhood much. It was a true bread and breakfast. It was quiet. And when the Wickwood first came in, much in the same. I mean, they did a beautiful job updating the building and the grounds. Fantastic job. This starts moving into an area where I'm uncomfortable because Mr. Lachey said that bright line, I never thought about it quite like that, but maybe this is the spot where, you know, because I know all the neighbors around it. I know all of them personally. Dr. Wiley across the street, Paula next door, Steve Minter down the street, people that own the dunes, Felicia Fairchild, Ted and Forrest. I know them all. And I think about them when I think about these types of situations. As a planning commissioner, what is going to be best for the community and for the neighbors to this property? I understand things change. Yeah, of course. But that event space that's where I start to get I'm not comfortable with that.
At this point, do we need a motion to table or what's?
Yeah, because I think if we don't have any other comments, and I do appreciate that, and to Commissioner Gardner, I think all of us
Thank you, AJ.
do try to think of everyone, the citizens, you know, the residents as well as the business owners. We represent both when we're talking about the city of Saugatuck and the planning commission. And again, it goes back, and that's why I always kind of said it kind of parlays into the master plan because there is that question of, well, it is our hard and fast rule of where the commercial ends today, you know, there, you know, is the R4 appropriate for, you know, more activity? These are things that every city has to kind of look at if they want to have any type of expansion. You know, you could say, okay, they can go over to like 640, 650 on the waterfront preservation district and they could develop something. This is like a block away. It's, you know, Water Street East, maybe Water Street North, I should say. We got to kind of like, we've talked about, you know, should we have changes, you know, in some of those? Those are all discussions that will start to happen. But there, again, it's like that would move. If we were looking at Water Street North, you could have certain developments that would be much larger than this, that would be all the way up at the corner of Lucy. You know, if all of a sudden Mill Pond wanted to change their business and, you know, develop it. And so it's just a matter of, you know, is it appropriate there on Butler? And I think, but as we're looking at it, we're talking about understanding the residents that live there and the impact, you know, that would have on them. Most of them, I agree, probably don't know exactly what zone they're in, but they do know that they're located close to downtown. And they do know that they have hotels and other businesses that are within a block or two of them. But we also have an obligation at times to kind of look at businesses and think, is this something that's beneficial for the overall community too? So again, if this moves forward.
Just one thought that I also had, it just popped in my head. If we were even to do individual site plan reviews, special land use requirements, and we grant one, that sets a precedent. So let's say we grant Wickwood and Porches comes in and says, okay, we want to do that. We as a commission would have an obligation to distinguish why we would, if we wanted to deny, I'm just picking on Porches because
Yeah.
you mentioned, and that's a good one. We would have an obligation to distinguish, to deny, and come up with grounds to deny. Otherwise, it really does open the doors and we have to say, okay, we did it. It's like the ADU thing. An ADU is an ADU is an ADU. And once we grant one, it sets a precedent and I think it legally, it would really set us up for somebody saying, wait a minute, this is exactly the same situation, only 3 blocks away. Surrounded by residences, 3 blocks away, you've got to grant it. You've got to grant us, and I wonder what a judge would do, but I suspect
think-
I know what a judge would do.
And that's kind of what it goes back to the point we've been saying, we have to kind of look at what is the potential for virtually every lot that's in all the zones that you're going to be making these changes to. And
Right.
The way it's written currently, there would be many things. And again, I made reference to kind of looking at, like land ratios, as to a guideline as to could somebody get an approval, to be a boutique inn, they'd have to have X coverage, of the parcel. So that would eliminate a lot of the potential buildings that are already built out, where they cover 80 or 90% of the lot. If you said, okay, you can only have 50% land, so there's ways that you could kind of structure it that would kind of limit, but that would all have to be evaluated and put in by us. Right now, this is their recommendation, but if we were moving it forward, we'd have things in there that could be subject to, and you start laying out what would be the rights of a special land use. So that's, again, this process in my mind will be, even if we were moving it forward because of their request, it's not something that will be done next month, and I can't foresee, because there's too many other things. So the concept, I think everybody's got different opinions on, but we would have to look at that and try to understand, where else would it potentially, could it occur?
And that's a great point, because Wickwood and their consultants come to us with a fait accompli. Gosh, isn't this reasonable? Isn't this all encompassing? Isn't this exactly what you could just move through and pass through and adopt and everybody would be happy? And you've raised a great point. It simply isn't that simple. And, they have a pattern of doing that. So it would be a very complicated, complex, thoughtful process. I think should be enhanced public notice, not just whatever font, the super small font that's buried on a public notice in the commercial record. Is that still our legal publication? Okay. This is the kind of thing that a lot of members in the community, in all of the potentially affected districts. I know the people who live above the Porches, and they say that even the porches, not the Porches, but the house next to them or whatever, can be noisy. And so those kind of people would need to have, not be surprised by something that we passed.
Chair Vance, may I address the commission? Is that permitted or not?
I will.
A few points I'd like to clarify, though, if I could. Mr. Lachey, I'm going to work backwards a little bit here with
Sure.
Precedent on special land use. While I can see your concern, you review each special land use based on the criteria of your zoning ordinance. So while I gather the concern for precedent of approval, you would still evaluate each property on its own rigorous as well. So just because you approve one does not mean you have to approve others. Granted, you have to go through your standards and find that they met or are not met. So I understand or acknowledge where you're coming from on the precedent aspect. I wanted to clarify, though, that just because you approve one does not mean you have to approve everything else that comes before you. Parking and noise, we heard when we worked with you guys in 2023 on the short-term rental task force, we heard parking and noise as a concern as well from short-term rentals. So We acknowledge that, but I think it's more of a broader community issue than just what a text amendment is proposing here. Regarding the event center, that is a term I think we've heard half a dozen to a dozen times now tonight. That is not their intent to turn this into an event center. Looking through your definitions, I don't see you have it event center defined either. So that might be something for staff to look into regarding that way. They are looking to bridge the gap between a bed and breakfast and a hotel and inn. And then, yes, doing so would impact other zoning districts. We propose as a starting point, permitted uses. You can go special land use, however you like to view it in that regard. We're not beholden to this. It's a starting point. As well, the master plan update, I acknowledge where you're coming from on that, but communities we work with, you could be 6 months, you could be 2 years away. So that's, I think, a little bit of a concern we would have, that if we're gonna wait through this process, I don't know the speed you guys are gonna work. I'm sure you're working diligently, but I'm working with communities as well that they've been diligently for 2 years and they're still not done. So that's a little bit of a concern. The
If I may say, if we didn't have to address a concern of yours every single month, I guarantee you we'd be moving faster on our master plan.
With regard to the comments on self-serving, unless a text amendment is brought forward by staff, to some extent, every text amendment by an applicant is self-serving. However, the way that we have proposed it, and I'm sure others have as well, is to a broader impact. So we do take a little bit of concern with the allegation that it's just self-serving. Would Wickwood have some benefit from it? Sure, but so would everyone else who this would apply to. So I did want to push back a little bit on the comments of this being self-serving. So with that, again, it's a starting point, our analysis that we did for the planning commission. We're not beholden to anything. If you view the special land use would be a better approach in order to give the public and the residents around a boutique in comment periods, fantastic. Again, we're trying to start somewhere with you guys. So, and as this is the first introduction to it, I'm sure there'll be a lot of iterations. I'm sure legal counsel will have iterations, concerns. City management will probably have it. Mr. Grayson will probably have it as well. So we're happy to continue to working with you to some regard as well.
Why did you come to us instead of to the city council with this?
So when I was flipping through your ordinance, I will be honest, Mr. Lachey, you are the only community that I work with that I know that an application goes to city council before planning commission for a rezoning or text amendment. I'm working with dozens across the state, and everyone else starts with the planning commission because you hold the public hearing, you solicit the feedback, you provide the recommendation to council. So the fact that your ordinance states otherwise is here nor there, but consistently across the state, it's planning commission starts first in order to do the workshops. So probably went on.
Okay, I served 14 years on the Pleasant Ridge City Commission. And my distinct recollection was that it was addressed to the city council and then referred to the planning commission because that's just, the planning commission then is the one who deliberates and talks and brings in the community and does public hearings, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'm just basing it on my background.
That's fine.
So you're saying that you brought it to the planning commission because that's what every other community does?
That's what our experience has brought us to, yes. That all the communities that we work with across the state, it starts with planning commission in order to have the dialogue as a recommending body to the legislation.
Okay.
But thank you for providing that clarity on us.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Chris, can we,
Sorry,
before,
Kyle, not Chris.
before we move on with obviously we're going to have a table, and because we didn't have the right public notice, you've already said that if we wanted to have discussion about it, everything being under the special land use, that would be something that you guys could kind of work with. Can you just give us a general idea as to where you stand on having a much lower capacity limit than what you're currently talking about?
I'm going to defer to Elizabeth on that if she doesn't, or Mr. Martin as well.
Well, thank you for taking my comments here. I keep hearing event center. We're not an event center. We are a small boutique inn. Have you been to the inn? Have you seen it? The capacity cannot handle the things that you're talking about at all. It's not the intention to ever become what you're saying. And to sit there and allegate that that's what we're trying to do, it's just not true. So I hear every time I'm going to expand, I'm going to grow next month. We've been recommended originally back in November by the city and the town and the attorneys to come with this idea. We took recommendations in a meeting in November and we came, and it was probably bad advice from back in November. So to sit here and keep saying this over and over again, I would appreciate if you would come see what we're doing, see what we're about, then you could feel it, because it's very different. You're talking like it's a rowdy party. It's all these things. It's not what we're about. It's not who we are. I mean, we were just awarded by TripAdvisor the top 10 best properties in the 10% of the world. They're not doing this to rowdy party places. We are a boutique luxury inn. This is what we do for a living. This is what we're trying to be. We're not trying to do all the things. We have a bed, we have an Airbnb next to us. They are much louder than we are. We are constantly saying, it's noisy. Our guests are quiet people. We're not asking for a 100-person wedding. We're asking for a small boutique wedding, and we have a lot of people coming to do that. So to say this is, it's just almost, it aggravates me to who I am and to what my business is. So all these allegations of this and this is definitely not true. And we're not going to come through and buy the next property and turn into this and that. That's just not what we're about. So when I hear this, it's going around in circles. It's not what this is. So I don't understand why it's gotten to this blown in thing, which is not even what we're trying to do.
Okay, I will never call it an event center again.
Thank
I
you.
apologize for that. If you currently have 14 units that you have,
Yes.
you can have a capacity of 84 guests. Now, they may all sit around and listen to classical music on headsets so that there is no noise generated. And that's great. But you may not own it forever. And once you become a boutique inn, the next owner may change what that definition in their mind is in terms of whatever. So I have concerns, and I absolutely understand that you are not trying to present yourself as another IVN out on Blue Star. And I understand that, you know, congratulations on the TripAdvisor. That's huge. But things, as everybody here is acknowledging, things change.
Right.
So what you intend today doesn't seem to be what you intended when you first bought the property, for example. And I'm aware of that. So you saw how we did with your request for liquor just a month ago. So I'm not opposed to Wickwood Inn existing.
I understand that.
And if if your business model requires that you now have consistently 84 people week in and week out for weddings or for birthday parties or for however, what kind of get that you want to call them other than events, then, you know, you may want to rethink your business model.
And where's 84 number? Where did that come from? We've never mentioned.
There's reason 84 was because
14 times 6?
times 6. It's the
Yeah,
sixth
but
time.
that was because we're talking about boutique inn. It's not for the Wickwood. We've said previous meetings.
Well, I was just throwing out, are you okay moving forward if you knowing that number's it's going to be lower?
Of
I have a
course.
strong
I mean,
sense it's going to
When
be
you're at
much
the
lower.
end, 75 people is almost impossible to do. We almost even can't hold it.
Correct.
That is the number. It all started back in the day. We held an SCA event for the lifetime membership. It was something that we held. There was 125 people came. It was a 2-hour event. It was super quiet. It wasn't for pay. It was just an event that we had. So that's where it started, because we were giving back to the community. I also heard that we don't support local businesses or something about that, which I don't understand that at all, because we support many local businesses. We support restaurants. We support retro boats. We support the golf courses here. We support many things. So I heard earlier that we don't support that, which is not true at all. Support many different things. We just had a media tour here. We took out for Coast 236. They held a lovely dinner for us. It was just for us. It was 22 people. And it was something that we did local. We retro boat, we worked with those people. So it's not like we're sitting here not supporting the community. We're very involved in the community, being on the SCA, working for the Oxbow, also working on the
November art, the November
shoulder
Food
season.
Festival.
Pardon me? Yes, shoulder season, the wine festival. So we're really committed to this community. Bought a house here. This is not something, because someone came from Chicago and we're just going to come in and open an event center and do that. I mean, we're part of the community. It's long-term. I grew up in a small town. I understand what this is all about. This is not something that I'm hearing that allegedly we could do.
I asked your consultant where he got the 6 times number, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I believe what he said was he took your capacity and went backwards and said, okay, that winnows down to 6 times your capacity. Now you're telling us that, no, you don't have capacity for 96 people or 84 people or.
I think the 6 times was for other boutique inns. We're not talking about, we're not writing this for us. It's for other people. And we're not
Again,
giving a
that's-
limit to us personally.
If it was moving forward, we'd have to kind of set our own limits as to what we think is appropriate.
Sure.
And if it fits for you, Wickwood, but I just ask these questions because it's different if you're bringing it to us because we're being asked to, address it now. If you weren't asking us to address it now, it may be addressed, I guess we talked about before, after the master plan, but that may be 27 or 28.
Right.
So, so just kind of giving us some, letting you hear us, but also having a chance to ask from you. And then as far as, don't take any of it personal
I'm
because
not.
our obligation, we look at what the Wickwood is and it's beautiful. And it's obviously, I think all along, we're trying to figure out how to allow some of these things to occur. Our issue is like Commissioner Sage just said, if you sold the business or if someone else meets all the requirements and wants to do something similar, we don't know them.
Of course.
So we now have to try to always build it in such a way that we feel comfortable that we've got enough restrictions that it would be appropriate if it had an owner who wasn't as caring as what you guys are. And so gosh, if I could be guaranteed that every owner would come in and have the clientele that you have and would have the space, it'd be like, okay, let's put one in each corner, maybe it's something that, but we don't know, what would be the next owner or the next person who's going to apply. And so I think that's why we have to kind of look at it. Everyone be case by case with the special land use, but you got to develop the criteria because you can't just say, oh, you meet all the criteria, but I'm still going to turn it down. Because we all know that as part of the planning is that if it meets all the criteria, you must approve it, whether you can't let your personal kind of fall in. So but I appreciate you guys kind of being here and at least hearing a lot of the comments because I think it will help. If we were to be moving forward with a public hearing next month, would you want this revised? And, I think you're kind of hearing there's why some things in here you may want to think about before we would even consider, a future public hearing. And I'll let you guys kind of work with Grayson and your legal counsels on that.
On that hearing, because when we submitted our paperwork, we never got an answer from the city about that it wasn't the right kind of hearing for. That we assumed that our hearing for this hearing was supposed to be for that, but we were told, so it's a little
Well,
surprising.
The issue with the notification that was sent for this one, it stipulated just directly for 510, which would have affected the R4. When the paperwork and everything came in, because now it's all encompassing, it relates to 9 other zones. And that's a big difference from a public hearing standpoint as to whether we're talking about 1 zone or 9 zones. So we didn't have proper notice. Now we can do, Grayson or you and Trent should step in here because we can actually put out a complete notice or something like this if you are asking us to move forward. I think what you're hearing here tonight is that you may want to consider, potential revisions. But you can, if you want it, we can actually put a public notice that we're talking about boutique inns for all zones. And
And it's like, oh, we did it, you're not gonna, this isn't gonna happen tonight, you need to do this instead of that. Kind of thing. I just don't remember saying.
Well,
say that.
when the packet was posted on the website, the recommendations, if you would look into the recommendation, you'll see right in there that it talked about this would be more of an introduction because we couldn't take action because we didn't have proper notice on what's being proposed. And so, as was mentioned earlier, we could have went directly to tabling it immediately. For the benefit of all of you, I thought, let's have a discussion. Let's allow some people to share their thoughts. So that gives you more information to kind of decide how you want to proceed.
Future, if we can go that prior or because we asked for all of that.
Understandable.
We appreciate that.
Just another minute for the commission to procedurally moving forward, and I know this might be a conversation we can have with Grayson and your planning consultant as well. How have you guys as a commission in the past worked through text amendments? Have you done like you are tonight, discussion, refine, and then public hearing on the revisions, or have you held your public hearing and then refined based on comments from the public? And that's going to impact how we want to proceed with you. If we're going to keep bringing revisions back, then you're going to have a public hearing, you might want to change those. So that's where we just would like to kind of know what procedural direction you'd like to go on this.
Now that for me is is challenging because I'm looking timeline that I've been on the commission. This is the first time we've had one coming from property owner. You know, in the past, when we started talking about being more proactive, we said, okay, let's take a look at short-term rentals. We developed a task force. Community kind of said, hey, they wanted to try to protect the waterfront. And so we developed and started our own, research and study of the waterfront and trying to determine, what's best. And we created the waterfront preservation. We know that even at this point that we've got a couple of these like hanging things from the waterfront preservation, like Water Street South, Water Street North, that are just kind of partial zones of what they used to be. And that's on our docket. But these are things that we were generating, that we knew. There has been discussions, which we kind of keep putting off because of the master plan, of looking at our uses. I have said numerous times that there's uses that are in one zone that's not allowed in a different zone, but there's really no justification, other than the fact that maybe at the time it was written, there was none of those businesses existed in that zone. So you just kind of didn't list it as a permitted use. So we've talked about trying to clean up, the consistencies, in some of our ordinance. And again, that would be us, which we require text amendments. So having one, and I've been asking a lot of questions of Trent, David, and Grayson too, because this is one of the first times that it's been brought since 2019 is when I came on. So the last 7 years of having one that's come before us. We've had situations where they wanted to do something within a zone, and we went back and forth. Does it qualify? And you had to make some exceptions and decisions. But this is the first time. And, with Wickwood, even with the merging of the properties and the rezoning, again, that was something that was kind of new, but at least I've been through that, as far as like allowing it to be rezoned. So I don't know the approach. And that's what I kept wondering is like,
I think, and you probably know the answer to this, and I'm going to ask Trent if I may. If it is a substantive change from what is printed for the public hearing, if there's a substantive change as a result of the public input or commission input, we cannot vote on that night. It has to go for another public hearing. Am I correct, Trent? If
Yeah,
it's like a comma or dotting an I.
right. Yeah. So if it's the same ordinance, I think it would be fine to continue with the one public hearing, similar to how we did with the sign ordinance, where we just kind of made little tweaks here and there. But if the changes were so substantial that it made it like a new ordinance, I would certainly be more comfortable with a new public hearing. And so given that all the different districts involved and things like that, like if we were removing certain districts and putting in other districts or changing it all from permitted uses to special use permits, like those may be more substantive and classified as a new ordinance. And so generally it'd be better to have another public hearing. And so like it may be more efficient here to just work on changes with them and introduce it and then hold the public hearing towards the end when we get sort of a draft nailed down. If we do get to that point, that may be a more efficient approach perhaps, but you're correct generally that if it's a new ordinance with substantial changes, it'd be better to have a new public hearing on it.
So to Trent's point there too, then I guess the commission, our ask would be, would you like us to come back with different options based on the criteria we're defining for your future consideration? We've taken notes, we've heard the concerns from you in that. Would you like us to say option 1, option 2, option 3, or even make columns of different potentials that you could explore that way to see what that might look like? Would that be helpful instead of continuing trying to tweak our memo?
I think it'd be helpful for me. I think giving us one thing that could be an up or down vote, I think is challenging. So.
And I think,
Go ahead.
as the chair has mentioned, looking at each of those properties, because how far can this grow is really, that's a pretty big task to have it just in an hour meeting.
Personally, I would feel better if we did have, discussions with some different options, kind of give some guidance. And then once we have some kind of consensus, if we were moving forward, redraft something that is much closer that we feel comfortable putting a public hearing on. Because I think if we just move forward with what's here, chances are there'll be some substantial enough changes that still might require another public hearing that has to be done, as he was saying, and probably, I can't guarantee that, but, so you don't have 3 or 4 different public hearings, that might be beneficial to.
So I think our last ask then would be if the commission will indulge us, as you continue to review this and have thoughts, over the next few weeks on it, if the chair is willing to collate those comments and then, or even send them to Grayson and he can provide them to us, that would help. I don't want to dismiss any of your concerns. We want to work with you. I don't want to be dismissive either in what has been brought up, but knowing kind of what your high level concerns are will help us better craft this to get you a better, document to review.
Okay. And again, I think that's beneficial here. We'll try to get some consensus. I think obviously we got a difference of opinion as to whether or not we should even have something changing within, the R4 transitional. So I think some of us are more open to it than others, but we'll kind of put some of those things together, so that you have a better idea as to what, path and likelihood of success.
Chair Mans, when I report back to the council at Monday night's meeting, I'm trying to think through how to present this. The question that very well may come up is going to be, because in my mind, this is a substantial text addition to our zoning ordinance. And there's a lot of impacts this could potentially have, everything we've been talking about. I could hear a council member too saying, is that really going to be seriously considered in advance of the master plan completion? Because that will have an impact, and it's going to. So I can see that question coming up. So I don't know what the answer to that question is going to be. If I'm not asked, I'm not going to answer a question that's not asked, but I can anticipate something like that coming up. And because this goes a little bit beyond, again, this is a unique situation. We've had a text amendment come from a property owner as opposed to being driven by either planning consultant or by our own,
Right. Priorities that can set by council.
Yeah.
We did address, to that point, Grayson, myself and David, and I'm sure Trent was probably involved. Again, going back to, yes, would be normally part of your master plan, kind of future land use and looking at properties. As they said, we could actually break that part out of the master plan, do it now, but that's the challenge for me with that is that it's easier to do if I was just looking at the R4, because that's kind of a discussion, but now you can be looking at it across everything. But it is something that we can do, and then you would incorporate whatever our vision is or what changes we make into, the master plan. But yeah, it definitely would have been easier if it would have worked, to when the master plan was already concluded, and then we were just relating back to that.
So the question
Go ahead.
would be, we can do it, but should we do it?
I'm not sure it would make sense to pull something out of the master plan discussion because ultimately city council has to vote on the master plan that we present to them. So we'd be sort of saying, this is what we think we're going to do. And then we're going to design a zoning text amendment based on something we've constructed that city council hasn't approved yet. So in my view, we look at this in the context of the master plan as it exists right now. And until it's amended, that's the governing document.
Right.
Mr. Baldwin, for what it's worth, that would also be my recommendation in our experience. Thank you. I appreciate that. Again, we do value the insight. We do value the concerns that you bring up. And we are, wanting to and willing to work with you in that regard. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So do we have a motion to table?
I'll move to table this discussion. I guess my question is, if I table it for next meeting and then they've changed things in the meantime, I'm not sure where that leaves us, but
Do we,
I think
Trent, would we
go ahead.
table the public hearing, or would we?
So I think you could table the public hearing. It's not really like a legally effective public hearing anyway. So tabling it, and then I think we could, Grayson and David and I can work with Wickwood in the background. And if we think a public hearing is necessary for the next meeting, we can try and get that noticed and on time. It sounds like the way things are going, it probably wouldn't be at the next meeting. It might just come back as a discussion item. And so I think we would just sort of table it for now until Wickwood decides and we decide that we're sort of ready to get to a public hearing. And then when at the next meeting or further down the line, when we get a draft that everyone's more comfortable with, the planning commission could direct us to notice the public hearing. But for now, I would just table it and then maybe bring it back as a discussion item, as long as there's a consensus between us and the applicant it sounds like there is, that might be the best way to handle it.
I'll move to table the discussion on the zoning text amendment.
Do we have a second?
Second.
It's hard, so a date certain or just indefinite?
I think that our procedure says if you table, it has to be brought up at the next meeting. And Trent may be able to weigh in on that, but can-
Yeah, I do believe that's the case. It might be in the bylaws. I can double check that.
I can just restate the motion. I move to table the discussion and public hearing on the zoning text amendment until the July meeting of the planning commission.
Second.
This would be a roll call vote.
Butler,
Yes.
Patrick,
Yes.
Gardner,
Yes.
Lachey,
No.
Raphael,
Yes.
and Mans.
Yes. Again, we're saying it's being tabled as a public hearing. It could still just be an additional discussion on revisions. If the revisions are going to be substantial, we need to notice that in the new public hearing.
It is in our bylaws, it is required. Date specific. If it's adjourned. Tabled or adjourned.
So we will have that on the July agenda.
And then if I could just jump in here quick, Mr. Chair, before we move on, I thought Commissioner Lachey and Commissioner Gardner had some good insight into why this came directly to Planning Commission, and maybe it would be better if it came to the council first, and then they sort of reviewed it and then decided if it was going to come to planning. I had some time to look into it while you all were deliberating. And your current ordinance does allow a zoning amendment to be initiated by a written request of one or more owners of property directly affected by the proposed amendment. That's in section 154.176. It goes on to then say that the amendments shall be submitted to the city council or the planning commission directly. So it could come directly to the planning commission. And then the next section actually says that city council shall refer every proposed text amendment to the planning commission to hold the public hearing. So even if it would have come to council under the current zoning ordinance, I think because it says shall, which means must, they would have been legally obligated to send it to you guys anyways. But I did look into the MZEA, and it says that the legislative body, so the city council, may provide by ordinance for the manner in which regulations are amended. And so I would want to do a little more due diligence, but if council is interested in sort of revising those provisions to change the procedures, to have them come directly to council, and then council decide if it's something that should go to planning or not, that may be something that we could implement. It would require a zoning amendment, so obviously it would have to go through a public hearing and it would take some time. But as it currently stands, it can come to the planning commission directly, and even if it didn't, it would have to come here anyways. But there may be some room to adjust that under the Zoning Enabling Act if it's something council would like us to look into. Maybe Councilman Gardner could provide insight on that, depending on what council's sort of thoughts are as to how these citizen initiated or resident initiated amendments should be handled. So I just wanted to provide that extra context because I thought it was a good consideration and it aligns with some of the discussions I've had with Grayson behind the scenes. And so hopefully that's helpful context.
It is, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Trent.
Trent.
Yeah, and my challenge with council will be to not get too far in the weeds with this, because I don't think, if I don't mention this, there's not gonna be any question about it. It's just gonna be more a matter of, are you gonna be doing this before the master plan's complete? I think that's gonna be probably the question that's gonna be asked. And there may be some debate about the, boutique in text, but I think that other issue, I don't think they'll even.
No, because chances are if it went before council, they would say, we'll take it on a recommendation, we'll send it to planning, and then it'll be on our agenda the next month anyway.
Right, or
So since we allowed for it, it made sense. They brought it directly to us to start with.
or they say, why is it coming here and not planning? And then Jake would have to pull up exactly what Trent pulled up and read that at the meeting. So it's been a learning experience for me.
Correct. Oh, this is
how this
definitely,
works,
like I
so.
said, it's the first time that we've actually had one driven from, from the public. So you're doing a lot more reading, a lot more questioning of council, but Thank you, guys.
conversation.
And
Appreciate
it is a good conversation. I know it's something that sometimes seems so simple, but when you're trying to work through it and think about the impact that it can potentially have in the process. I wish there was just a way you kind of say, hey, this makes sense for that business. But our current zone doesn't allow us to kind of look at it business by business. It's got to be within the ordinance and within the zone. So thank you. That concludes our new business for this evening. Then we move on to old business, which was the master plan discussion, and that's in our kit starting on page 74. And
Thank you.
thank you, guys. Thank you. And so we have stuff that's in here that's kind of a draft. I believe Grayson, you and David kind of put this together. David would be here tonight. He's actually on vacation this week. And so he said he was going to try to see if he would be able to zoom in, but he's actually on some island. And I think earlier today we tried to get a hold of him and he couldn't get connected. So, well,
Good
Grace,
for him.
I know. So it's exactly, that's kind of like I said, just tell us that. Damn it. So I think Grayson said he would kind of like walk us through kind of what's here and then we could kind of have some discussions on this outline and start to try to develop as we're pushing forward. Because once we have the outline kind of identified, then they can actually start drafting the language that would go into each of these.
Can I ask a quick question? Because this will come up on Monday night is what is the deadline we've set for ourselves to have this brought back to council for discussion in terms of the ultimate completion of it? Do we have a timeline on this yet?
Oh, we did, but like
When
I
in
was,
September?
like, yeah, it was September. That's what, September was supposed to be our draft and then we would have a public, the idea was we'd have a draft in September,
Okay.
another public hearing, not public hearing, but a public, presentation
Okay.
in October so that we could actually between September and October and then have an October us to make a recommendation to council for the approval of it.
Okay.
You know,
And
When
the
I-
thinking was, as I recall, was so that there's still lots of people still in town. So that there could be a presentation while there's still
Hey,
lots of people
exactly.
who would be able to participate and have, be aware and be able to give input. That's why it was September versus
Yep.
November.
And I think that so that was the original timeline that we kind of talked about at the start of the year. You know, given where we are, and when I look at these outlines and then the fact of like what's been written so far, you know, unless David's got like a whole team that can like, you take each one of these. I'm starting to get concerned that July's meeting, maybe now we're addressing, you know, one of the areas like the mobility or future land use, which is one of the areas that we're kind of, all this is really relating to. That's July. Then you have August, you know, so the chance of having something to review in August, I don't know, I'm becoming.
I would appreciate if our staff would tell Wickwood to take a back seat for a few months so that we can actually do the business that we are statutorily required to do. And you know, it's freaking 8 o'clock
I
and we
know.
just spent an hour talking about Wickwood again. And, you know, this is not going to happen by September. And it was, you know, I just wish rather than accommodating Wickwood, you would accommodate the commission and say,
Well-
okay, this is, you know, this is what we're here to do.
But by ordinance, they are allowed to bring stuff before us and we have to review it. And we can't just say, no, we're not going to put it out there. So it's, again, they're filing it, they're following all the process, they're putting down the escrow to pay all the fees.
Between now and next month, there are going to be, it was said, discussions between Wickwood, McKenna, Grayson, Trent, and David about something. And I suspect that that something will be brought to us next month as revisions, as discussion topic, as something versus, I mean, we have to bring it up next month because that's what our bylaws require. But to spend an inordinate amount of time every single month on one business owner's demands of our city distracts us from the business of the entire city. And so I think it is possible that you, as our planning director, and our city attorneys say, okay, yes, we can begin discussions, but we're not going to have a fully evolved set of new crap to bring before you next month that we again spend a lot of time talking about so that it can be brought up again the following month. It's just my thought.
And I think when I was referring to knowing that the master plan is important, the idea that we could actually talk about the part of future land use, are our zones appropriate? That can be our topic. It doesn't have to relate to Wickwood. We can, as part of our discussion, we can kind of talk about, land permitted uses. Should we expand? Should we fix some of our definitions that we have currently for a bed and breakfast, for a hotel, for a motor court? Should we add one? We can do all of that as part of our master plan, and we can call it part of the master plan, and all the work that David would be doing or our legal team would be billed to the city. If we call it that we're reviewing it for this ordinance change, the legal work and the consulting, I believe, would be billed to them, correct?
I'm less worried about that than making sure the process is the most efficient, so.
Well, because whether, to be able to
That,
get-
that brings up my concern of we're relying on a consultant that is being paid for by the
No, no.
petitioner.
When I'm talking about the consultant like David, because David would have to actually go through and develop kind of his analysis for us if we were to consider any type of zoning changes of the impact and what properties could be impacted in other zones. That's going to have to be part of part of the future land use conversation that will come before us. Unless everybody just looks and says, okay, we don't think in the next 10 years there should be any changes to the way it's currently zoned. But, so if we want to talk about the potential of any changes within it, for that future land use, we're going to be having a lot of these exact same conversations. And that needs to happen in the next month or two if we have any chance of having a draft of a master plan by fall.
Yeah, again, don't misunderstand my question. It was not a criticism. It was more so I can communicate back to council. Things change, right? And for the reasons that Mr. Lachey mentioned, there's been other priorities put upon us by a business. So trying to manage all that together is a challenge for the city staff. So what I want to do is set expectations with council, because we originally said September, we're not going to meet that.
Right.
It's unlikely to meet that. When can they expect it? Just so I can manage their expectations. They're not going to push back on this. And if they do, I will tell them, don't push back on this because this is what's.
Because we can only review what's brought before us. And so it's like, okay, we can review outlines, we can talk about is this beneficial, but until, when I look through and I think of, vision statements, desired outcomes, histories, land use, population demographics, economic profiles, that's nothing that any of us are drafting. It has to be drafted. It has to be brought into a meeting. We have to review it. So a lot of this kind of falls back on, what is Grayson? Earlier in the year, we talked to him, we were asking David, and I think this is legitimate to ask him again. Does he have the capacity? Because we had in our budget, to hire another outside consultant, like, Douglas did. They had 3 different consulting groups. One of them did all the writing. One of them kind of had the meetings where they helped with all the profiles and did the public sessions. So David, says he can do it, but capacity wise, with everything else that's going on, is he capable? Do we need to have a team? Because a lot of this is from, like demographic studies and your actual land. We can look at what was done. Most of that doesn't change from 10 years ago. Some of it's a little different, but a lot of that is similar. But, I look at it, I'm like, okay, I can kind of envision it, but I'm not writing it. None of us are writing it.
It's, doing a special meeting, it doesn't make sense because without the capacity on the back of it, there's nothing.
We can have a special meeting where we're just discussing, but
Right.
the only thing that I really think that will come before us that truly involves kind of our discussion is once it's all laid out, is the future land use and then the priorities of what we would like to see moving forward. Here's all, like we can using Douglas's, where they listed all the things that they would like to see addressed, and then you put priorities on it. And so, and those will be discussions that kind of have to happen here. Everything else is kind of written for our review. And yes, once we read it, we can say, oh, you know what, maybe we should highlight that more, or maybe we take that part out, and you make those kind of comments. But, so at this point, we'd like to start to see some drafts coming in, for us to see But again, I realize now we gotta have an outline that we all agree on before we can actually have a draft.
Again, this is not a criticism at all.
No.
It's just more a, make sure I can set the expectation with.
And if we're gonna hire another consultant, which I'm supportive of, if that's gonna make this be on time, we gotta do that right now, because we're gonna have to find the person, get a contract signed, get them up to speed. You know, there's a whole process that's gonna take at least a month, if not a little more. So, but, so it's really up to.
David talked about it. Have you?
We landed at pretty much the same spot when we last talked.
Which means what? I'm sorry.
That he said that he has the capacity for it.
Okay.
Continue. When was the last time you had a discussion about that?
3 weeks ago.
Okay, great. To your point, my ballpark is, again, if we want to have public input next June, you know, that's just, I'm pulling something out. I mean, you know, there's the vast majority of this checklist, I call it a checklist, the comprehensive draft outline, the vast majority has to be done by consultants, as you just said, Chairman Mans. And B, we have a fraction of it. I shouldn't say none of it, a fraction of it. Mobility and connectivity, for example, we do have, or some of it. So,
We haven't had a chance
so-
to discuss it.
right. So if we want, and the reason I say June is because that's when people are back in town, starting May, June. And if we want to have public input, that's more realistic than saying, hey, let's try to jam it in February when nobody's here.
Right. I'd rather have a good product at the time of the year when there's people here, as you're suggesting.
Right.
That can actually participate and will engage on it.
I
As
could
opposed to
see,
a half-baked product that none of us wanted to be in that position.
I could definitely see the reality of that. However, I don't want to start talking about June because I don't want to be sitting here next March and still not have 75% of it written for my review. So I still want to try to get it written. The parts that can be written now should be starting to, again, a lot of the demographic stuff that comes from census, the natural features, waterways, things like that. There's no reason, historical, no reason that stuff can't be being drafted. And every month we have a chapter or two, in front of us. Even doing it that way, but I don't want to throw out like too soon June because I know.
If everyone take a deep breath, like.
And it's
No.
like, okay, October, we're sitting here and I'm like, oh, we still haven't seen the draft. And then December comes, and so
I
then,
understand the psychology of your comment, but
right. No, I agree. I mean, realistically, if you're trying to talk to council on that, to be able to have a public, type of interaction and presentation of it, to have it anytime between November and May is probably, it's like you pushed it through during the off season.
So are we statutory requirement to have this delivered by a certain date? Because I know it said 10 years in the.
Right, it's a 10-year, you had to start like, you're supposed to, 5 years, which happened right during COVID, so we just did a quick review, and so there really wasn't any material change. At the
Yeah.
10-year, you have to actually start to review it. And Trinidad is correct, but it doesn't mean you have to have it done in the 10th year.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I was gonna say is that there's no necessarily hard deadline for when it has to be done.
Because it can still come out, it can be the master plan 2026 released in 2027, or you can call it master plan 2027. But the first public hearing occurred in 2025. The majority of the work is being done during 2026.
Right, so my position as a planning commissioner would be is it's our job to make this happen by a date that we set. Whether that means additional resources, a writer, or whoever that may be, out of all due respect to David. If we set a date to say we want to have this product ready for us to look at in February, for instance, for community discussion in June, is that realistic for David to be able to do that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that's kind of where I am on this, is that we should be driving that since we don't have a statutory requirement, but we want to get this done, right?
Right. And I think that's kind of, that be, or at least, my recommendation is to kind of say, what can we expect to see written in July? What can we expect to see written in August? And I think that it should be, at this point, if we can agree that 75% of this outline, is even good, it would allow them to generate chapters, historic preservation. I mean, again, there's certain ones in here, I think they could be writing currently. At least we could have it a draft next month. And then we can kind of say by August, we'd like to have this part covered. And then we can build in, because then David also, like all the stuff we're talking about, even with Wickwood, the analysis of each of our zones and the potential of where we have inconsistencies between it, if we want to look at that as part of the master plan, because that may be a priority, that we could identify. That is additional work for him too, because he's the consultant that kind of does that, just like he was doing with the waterfront preservation. And again, I would be hard pressed to say I'm going to come out of the master plan and not have a recommendation to kind of look at these commercial zones down here, because we've been talking about it for 2 years. And so it's, so I'm hoping that there is something in our master plan that says that should be a top priority coming out of the master plan.
Grayson, would this be appropriate to direct David to present to us next month, information on, say, let's say 3 of the bullet points, and I'm pulling 3 out, for example, understanding Saugatuck, economic profile, and let's say community character.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Okay, that's a good start. Thank you.
So was there,
I just want to make sure my comments were not taken as criticism of
Not at all.
anything at all.
No,
I appreciate
you're
it because
being
I've
the
been
council
saying the
representative.
same
It's great. No, trust me, you've said that multiple times this evening. I haven't taken anything you've said as a criticism of us or anybody else.
Thank you.
That's just me speaking.
Absolutely. Grayson, in the outline that we had on page 76, where it says like housing in neighborhoods, isn't that kind of a duplicate to, we have housing profile that's already in, and then we have that neighborhood analysis, the character analysis for the community. So was housing in neighborhoods, was that like an overlap, or was
Yeah, so we can do it a few different ways and kind of split it up so that in the housing and neighborhoods, we begin kind of going into those like actual challenges like that are kind of noted there, like the aging population, housing diversity, whereas the housing profile will be more of the data just kind of there, and then this area could be more solutions.
okay? So that's why.
Which would be which? Say it again.
The housing profile that comes first would set up the data, and then later on discussing.
On our
potential-
housing neighborhood would
Yep.
be what we do. Okay, or where we want to go. Got it.
When I looked at
Thank you.
the, like underneath understanding Saugatuck, we had the housing profile. So we're talking about housing stock, housing
Yep.
affordability, ownership. And then when I turned it over and I saw like housing diversity, aging, I was like, well, again, I was
Yep.
trying to think if we were just looking at it, not to duplicate.
Yeah.
But otherwise, and this is really when I started getting even more nervous, to your point, when I was looking at this outline. And I said, well, really, all these things are kind of necessary. And then I started thinking, well, if it's got a 4-page outline, how long does each one of those line items take, to draft?
We'll find out.
And you listed economic profiles, one for next month. I see that as a significant task. That's, it depends on how in-depth you want to get into it. You can make it as big or small as you want, I guess.
Absolutely agree with that, and I'd say that even if we bring you something, then at least you.
At least
can
a
say,
starting-
Go in on this.
There you
more,
go.
Exactly.
Expand here.
Because
and then we
again, when they
can
bring
go
up
from
housing
there.
profile, like some of it.
I took that mean simply, I'm sorry. I'm going to cut you off. I took that to mean literally, you look at
A draft.
demographics. You look at data. What percentage of the community is employed? How much money is generated from tourism? How many local businesses are there? I don't know what regional content even means, but do we do cherries instead of oranges? I don't know, but I mean,
I hear those things as the population and demographics, but with the item right above that one. But
It's right. I mean, we can kind of work with David, have him kind of like choose at least 2 or 3 that he's going to come back with.
yep.
The economic one may take a little bit longer because it will require getting more like the business data and that, but like housing profile, many of these we should be almost able to have. We did so much study for like the short-term rental. We know how many homes we have in every zone. We know what the businesses are. So the housing stock, the affordability, home ownership, vacancy, it needs to be drafted, but I think most of that data is there. It's a matter of kind of making a priority to draft it. You know, obviously the chapters that would talk about the community engagement that's happened so far, that's already kind of been drafted because we had the summaries, but it's like, how would you put it together now for a draft that would go into like a master plan? I think the vision, that's always, those are, many times they say do it up front, but then it's almost like easier after you kind of got some other things going to kind of put your visions together. The population demographic, I thought most of that comes from census data. I don't know.
I do have a lot of that data already pulled. It just needs to be organized.
I may have misunderstood the bullet point understanding Saugatuck, but I thought that entire section was just raw numbers, just percentages and total numbers and how many people are employed, who live in town, how many people are employed who don't, how many people, what's our unemployment rate, just simply raw numbers. I didn't, that was how I interpreted that whole section.
Okay.
Because it follows introduction, but
That was.
that's just
my intent
simply
as well,
crunching
but
numbers and
be to-
Right. And again, if that's kind of what our economic profile is where we're just kind of throwing out, we get that from maybe the.
here's where we are.
Right. And then, when we get into community character and as we start to move through, like in the housing development, then we start to get into more of like the issues it's surrounding it. But yeah, it would just be a matter of, the mobility, which was well drafted. It gave us a lot of information. Is that the draft that we would envision going into the master plan, or do we need to kind of like look at what he's presented to us and kind of go back? Because I think there was, in my opinion, there's like, he was showing places where you may want to have sidewalks, and I kind of went back on that whole thing of, well, if there's a sidewalk on one side of the street, yeah, it'd be nice if it's on the other side of the street, but if I had to make it a priority, I would rather see, at least one sidewalk, and then if I got a street that doesn't have any, I'd have that as a priority, so those are the kind of things that I think we got to kind of feed back to him as a planning group to review at least that memo that he gave us on mobility and say, here's our comments on this, and let him redraft it, and that could become one of the chapters that he develops and delivers to us.
I'd say that that's exactly how that map was supposed to work. It's just supposed to show exactly what you have right now
Right.
so that you guys can go through and think about what would make the most sense. But
And I
It's
think
easier
he
to
had some
see it
proposals in
with
there,
lines.
but it's like, yeah, so it's a matter of us, because he did kind of put that together. So there are certain things, I guess, that have come, to us.
Well, I want to respond to that a little bit, because I made some markups, and then that was exactly what you talked about. So Lucy has 0 sidewalks. It could really use one. If it ever came up to, how do you do that to get to? It's just not going to be feasible, and it's not going to happen. But getting one can happen.
Correct. And I think it's kind of what drove me.
Should we be making the markups? Because I made the markup of, well, show them all where they're all missing. and then
Exactly,
that
and
way
that's
they
part of
can-
the, like.
that's the vision.
The vision, or when you're listing all the things that we currently have.
Yeah,
And then when we're talking about, future or what needs to be addressed, it is the expansion of it.
Right.
And then where do we recommend that we expand it?
okay. So I'm happy
And
with
that's
my
the
comment.
very
now,
type of
but,
thing,
yeah.
that's the very type of thing, I'm sorry to get you off, very type of thing I would love to be spending our meeting
Yeah,
talking about.
absolutely.
Looking at the map and going, yeah, Lucy on one side, oh, this block of Elizabeth has no sidewalks. Oh, yeah, but what are we going, a big one,
Right.
sidewalks on Park Street. I mean, I would love to have this, our meetings, those discussions, not whether somebody has 96 people that they can come in and serve liquor to.
And I think
That was set a bad tone. They should have not had a 6.
on page 79, when you had the measuring success, because what kind of triggered that whole sidewalk thing I was talking about was and again, I know these are just things you threw out, you probably pulled from somebody else's plan or one of the plans that you kind of, but where it said sidewalk miles added, that's where I kind of got into, I was like, well, I don't really care how many feet or miles we add, it's where we add them. So I don't want to make a goal of, we're going to add, 50 miles of sidewalk. I'm like, well, no, where am I putting those 50 miles, kind of a thing. So it was more of like, sidewalk improvement as opposed to miles or something like that. But we'll kind of get into, but I think that last part, when we get to that 78 through the end, when you start talking about the future land use, the opportunities, you know, when we're talking about like downtown and all the different sectors of the city, what do we think of the opportunities that could come or we could foresee over the next 10 years? Those are discussions that we'd be having here that will kind of direct the writing. But a lot of the other stuff, the writing can be done and brought to us. And, you know, but here I think we would have to have kind of like discussions, action items, you know, on goals. You know, you guys can make recommendations of it, but a lot of that should kind of be driven by the planning commission, you know, on the goals and prioritization.
Question on the plan that we're updating. How much of that's gonna be pulled forward? Are we just writing it from scratch again, or we're taking, I'm assuming we're taking some of what we have in our, because a lot of that's still valid.
Yeah, definitely taking some of it from there, but it will be in its own format, kind of similar to how Douglas did theirs as well.
Because, you know, what you, at least when we were talking about originally, like a lot of the stuff when it comes to the assets, like when we look at the parks, many of the parks are still there. But we have to kind of look at is, you know, have we made changes to Culver Park in the last 10 years that we need to incorporate and update? The new money that's being spent on the downtown park
Village Square.
for like, you know, that's already in place. So that needs to be incorporated that we're currently putting in, you know, improvements to the basketball court, adding pickleball courts, you know, Mount Bald Head, you know, the restrooms. So those, anything that's happened from the 2016 to now, but the majority of it is already written, you know, all the data didn't really change, you know, unlike Mount Bald Head. I mean, it's still 303 steps. I mean, if they had statistics, you know, on how many people use it or something, that'd be great. You know, if we had, because I think the one thing we don't really address is kind of how important recreation is. We talk about the waterways in that and a little bit on Oval Beach, but you know, kind of looking at, you know, what drives people to come here? Because that's also factors into future businesses and do we need more businesses or more, you know, event space or more, you know, whatever. So the
Yeah.
recreation part, I think, can play in a little bit more than what we currently have in the outline.
Yeah. And the master plan is referred to quite often, people who've never read it. They've heard of it, or they may see a little section of it, someone's mentioned to them, but what would be important for the community, and that's part of our responsibility, is to get this master plan done, because then the council has something to plan to, because when ideas come to us, and they come to us all the time, come to the zoning director, come to the city manager, come to everybody on staff, how does that fit into a master plan strategy? And we have something that's 10 years old, which needs to be updated. So where I'm going with this is that I think we should light a little fire under us to get this done, because I think with things changing so quickly, let's get the resources for the staff to be able to get this done with us.
Yes.
You know, spend the money and get it done, because
again, it's something that
again, not a criticism, just I think, you know, let's light a fire and
right there. It's like even was,
Right.
you know, perfect example is kind of talking about like the R4s and not being static. And it's like, well, if all we're saying is that everything is okay the way it is, then let's just take the 2016 and move it forward.
Right.
You know, but the city is changing and we do have, you know, intent and growth. And we have to start looking at as the township and Douglas continue to grow, you know, what does that potential impact have? We can't project it, but we have to think about, are there things that we need to potentially look at, like having a boutique inn, so we can kind of compete in the city to, you know, some of these smaller, you know, spaces or something that's being built, that new property that's being built out on, in township is going to be a higher end, smaller boutique hotel. And they're going to compete. And so it's like, well, do we just want to let that outside of the city of Saugatuck take that part of the business? You know, so that's why I think, you know, in that future land use and kind of talking about where do we see opportunities, we need to make certain that we are addressing that so that when council goes back and they say, well, our master plan talked about that this may be something that we should be looking at.
I completely agree with Commissioner Lachey. This is the kind of thing that I'd love to be talking and spending more time talking about, because this to me is exciting. This is what planning is. I heard today at another city meeting that Douglas has, if I got my number right, 400 units approved coming online over the next couple of years. That's just the city of Douglas. That the township's got.
Townships, I know.
So back to my point I made previously is that the city needs to be ready for all those additional people coming into town. How do we get them here out of their cars, et cetera? That this is just ramping up. So, you know, the city needs to be ready.
Is the one thing that was in the 2016 that I found interesting that talks about how all the tri-communities agreed at that time that the hub of the community was going to be the city of Saugatuck for all the commercial and primarily the entertainment. Now, again, that's changing somewhat, but it's still kind of the case. So if they're building that much and they still want to think that this is going to be kind of like the center of the, the commercial hub of it, how do we accommodate that? Because it's no longer just the city of Sagatuck's growth. Our growth is again somewhat limited. I mean, I know we've got pockets of opportunity, but we have to figure out how you're gonna, again, that's for the whole parking. And I love the interurban thing that's happening now. With the continuous loop. And that could be something that's expanded. These are things that we have to kind of look at. I agree. And I really would. I think all of us would. And that's why we've talked about, could you have like a special meeting that's just on this, but we need to have starting points and you got to have stuff kind of brought to you. Because right now we're talking in generalities and you don't really have, any of the data to kind of to look at, but I think that economic profile would be good. And that's also, I think, one of the negatives of it changing from a tri-community to just the city. And we, Douglas kind of did it, and so did Township, but they control a lot more of their own destinies than what we do. A lot of our, future growth and some of the opportunities is because of things that are happening outside of our own boundary. And so you have to be aware of that community. And I think we had one thing in there, but when we talk about community, it almost needs to be expanded out to the tri-community. And how does the other communities affect some of our issues that we believe we may have? And if there's ever consensus, and I can talk with Grayson, if we want to put in just one meeting, sometime I hate adding meetings during the summer because I know everyone's schedules are so kind of crazy and people are traveling. But if we, to have a meeting where we just kind of identify where David or the new consulting, whoever was going to be doing it, needs input from us, on like a mobility, or if we want to pick, a couple that we're talking about right now, we could have those type of meetings. And again, it's not to go back to Wickwood, but if we were talking about, uses, we can have a meeting that just really looks at all of our uses in our zones and actually start to review that, from a standpoint of is that an issue that we should be addressing, highlighting in the master plan that we don't have consistency or rationale between uses in various zones, or if we don't think that we need 23, zones, should what are the recommendations that come out of the master plan be that we look to consolidate? These are all things that, it's not any one of us that's opinion, it's really all of us that have to kind of like come together on that opinion. Because I guarantee those are things when we take to the public, if we ask them, should we have 23 zones or 7 zones? They're not really going to care, but it really matters to all of us. And is there a rationale?
Right.
Like Ryan always kind of told me when I first was getting on that he's like, well, it seems like a lot of zones, but he's like, everyone knows what zone they're in, which I'm like, no, most people don't. But, but if they need something, they can look up their zone and this is the rules for their zone. So if you've got 27, it makes it harder on maybe the administrators, but there's nothing wrong with having, the type of zones that we have. But if we thought that, hey, we don't need 4 commercial zones, we just need 2, could we consolidate? My feeling is probably yes. But that's just one person out of 7.
Okay.
So we'll talk about it, but if we had the opportunity for a special, I mean, obviously we can call it, but I don't like calling meetings unless we've got a consensus that everybody would like to see something like that, if we thought that would be beneficial. Or you just want to try to carve out enough time in future meetings.
My opinion is if we don't, the June's gonna be, we're gonna be pushed up against that deadline.
Yeah.
We've mentioned about getting some things from David and he's just had too much on his plate, so.
Yeah.
This is what I
We've been
did.
assured by our planning director that we will have 3 elements of this outline for us next month.
This is sort of what I did for a career, is you gotta have a schedule and you gotta have some commitments and there's gotta be something to it. And I don't know if I want to get into that type of requirement, but that's,
I would think
otherwise
that
it's gonna creep.
if we can at least have some of the ones that we can start to review in July, then we may say, hey, to help him out, let's have a special meeting between July and the
There you go.
August meeting. So that we can kind of say, okay, now we want to, in advance, and Grayson, I can work with them and David to kind of say, here's the ones that we think that are going to require the most input from planning. Let's start to have a discussion, just a meeting where we're talking just like this, but there's at least, we've got it listed out. So we kind of like, instead of just throwing it out, you've got a list and we go line, well, item by item and kind of get a consensus. Sound good? Grayson?
Two quick things. I did just receive all the data that the CVB collects today, so I'll be going through that and make sure that's incorporated, especially for the economic portion.
Great.
And then second, I'm about to send out a survey that I put together for you guys. It's just specifically input about the draft, what you guys are thinking for priorities, just to help myself and Dave
Yep.
just get this started. So
Okay.
it should be quick and
Cool.
Great. All right. Is there any other discussion on the master plan at this time? If not, we'll close out old business. We'll move to communication, which we didn't have any this month. The report of officers, I know AJ said next month he thinks he'll have more from the parking. He really didn't have an update, so he had to be excused early, which takes us to the final public comment of the evening, which can be any topic that you want to bring before us. Just give us your name, your address. And we don't have anyone in the room, so I don't know if there's anyone online. I don't have any hands up, so we can close out the second public comment of the evening, which takes us to commissioner comments. And I think I'll start with.
Welcome to the new commissioner. Thank you for joining us. We've got a full house again. That's good. I think is, again, I'm with Lachey that we need to start moving some things forward and get some things done. So look forward to that happening, and I'm supportive of a special meeting when we have some data.
Perfect. Great.
I concur with that. And also, yes, Chris, welcome to the Planning Commission. Thank you for raising your hand to serve. I look forward to serving with you. And I think your zoning experience will be a plus for us. So thank you.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here instead of sitting back there. So appreciate that and welcome. So. And reach out to any of us. If you have questions, I believe you spoke to Craig for some background, or you were going to. Reach out to any of us if you say, hey, you know, what's this mean? Or anyway, I'm sure we're all that. So.
Yeah, welcome, Chris. Glad that you're here. Good to have a full commission, so.
Fantastic. Chris, anything?
Thank you. Excuse me. We have reached out to a couple of y'all, and am I scheduled for that training through Michigan State?
I'll get you fully scheduled right after this meeting.
Okay, good. And I look forward to learning more about what the heck you guys are talking about. But seriously, the first part of the meeting was kind of familiar. That's getting into the nitty gritty and work sessions. Do you guys do work sessions? Is that what you're talking about, to get into these six different little sites?
It would be more of a special meeting because we're required, we have to, with the Open Meetings Act,
Sure.
we can't have more than a majority of us ever together. You really can't discuss business without it being part of an open meeting. So that's why they're always in special meetings.
Yeah, we
But-
don't do workshops like city council, but
Yeah.
it's just a special meeting if we need one.
But thank you. And final comments, of course, as I said up front, is welcoming, Chris, I think it's just nice to have the full group. And we all are available. I even reached out today, say, hey, if you got any questions, anything going on, always feel free. And I think the question was, is this normal to have it driven, and it came up, because like I said, this is my first experience where somebody is kind of pushing us, to continually, look at and asking us to make, decisions or revisions. So you're coming at an interesting time. We're right in the middle of the master plan and some of these type of items, so we welcome the assistance. And so thank you and welcome. Otherwise, I think this was productive as far as at least getting some ideas out to Grayson and I know David can go back and kind of listen to the meeting as far as, how we're going to try to progress forward. But with that, I will conclude and just say thank you to all of you and ask for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Send me the code that just like to your email.
Oh,
sorry, the other one was late, so I figured I'd just get it with you today.